Hi there, everyone. I am here making a little companion video to my arrow tip earrings tutorial. There were a few comments on there talking about how they didn't really understand how the decreasing stitch worked. So we're going to go into that a little bit today. This is what the earring actually looks like. And instead of using the 11-aught beads that the earring requires, I'm going to be using 10-aught beads today, so that hopefully it'll be a little easier to see, since, they're so small and I gotta hang on to my work somehow, so sometimes fingers getting in the way. So I don't have the exact same colors that I have on this earring, but I will be using this brown color as a stand-in for my copper, and this white color as a stand-in for my matte white. So I have got my thread already threaded onto my big eye needle, and I'm starting off this white piece where I've got the first row already added to my thread. So I've got a navy stop bead on here. You can see it's a stop bead because it's got the little loop of thread around it. Then I have one of my stand-in copper beads. I have 10 of these white beads. And then I have put on a wire guard. I have another 10 white beads after that. And then another copper bead. So that is the first row of our white piece. And so I'm going to take my little row here, and I'm going to pick up another one of my copper beads, and I'm going to peyote stitch it on. Now I'm not going to really go into depth about peyote stitch. There's a lot of really good tutorials on there about doing peyote stitch. So just going to get this started real quick so I can really show you that decreasing stitch. So we've got these two peyote stitch on now. I am going to grab another white bead and peyote stitch that on. So when we peyote stitch, we are skipping one bead and going through the next bead. And that's what causes our beads to lay in a sort of brick lay pattern like that. So we're just going to keep peyote stitching on white beads until we get to where we are going to be doing our decreasing stitch. Okay, so here we are. I've got one copper bead peyote stitched on. Got 1, 2, 3, 4 white beads peyote stitched on. And here is where we're going to get to our little decrease area, right? So you can see I've got a bead right next to the wire guard on this side, a bead right next to the wire guard on this side. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip over both of those beads and go through the bead that comes after that, okay? So we've skipped 2 beads and we're going into the 3rd bead. And that way, when I pull it closed here, you can see that it has really bunched up all those beads. Now this is really like a herringbone stitch, but instead of, doing the increase after that, we're just going to go back to peyote. So I'm going to grab another one of my white beads and skip 1 bead, go into the next bead, and then we keep on peyote stitching from there. So really, when we do our decreasing stitch for that first row, we're just skipping 2 beads instead of 1 like we normally would for peyote stitch. Okay, and so I'm going to keep peyote stitching this row, and we're going to do the turnaround to come back and do our 3rd row, because from here on out, the decreasing stitches are essentially the same, but they look a little different because we don't have a wire guard on there, right? And because we've already done the decreasing stitch in the 1st row, then it doesn't really look like much when we skip those 2 other beads, and I'll show you what I mean when we get there. So I'm going to do my little turnaround here so that I can get back to this top copper bead going towards the inside. And remember not to go through your stop bead, because then it will be impossible to take off at the end. Okay, so we're ready to go back the other direction. And so I continue stitching on white beads with peyote stitch. Okay, so we've got 4 white beads stitched on with peyote stitch, and we're about to get to our little decreased area again. So what I've got here is I'm actually skipping 2 beads in our straight line of peyote, right? Because we got our straight line of peyote going all the way to this bead right here. Okay, and the other one, the straight line's going all the way to this bead here. So we are actually skipping 2 beads when we do this decrease, but it doesn't really look like much because these 2 beads that we're connecting together are basically already buddies, because we have done this decreasing stitch before the in the last row. So I'm just skipping these 2 beads and then going into the next bead that is sticking up. Okay, so we're going from this bead to this bead, skipping those 2 beads underneath, and that is our decrease stitch. And those are going to look the exact same for every row after this. It's going to be those 2 beads that we skip to go in to the next bead. So I'm also going to show you how we do that with the ones that don't have the wire guards on them, because that does look a little different. So this is going to be the stand-in for my green piece. I don't have this exact green color in this larger size of beads, so we're doing this sage colored piece right now. And that means I've got a navy stop bead on here once again. I've got 1 copper bead. I have 28 of these stand-in green beads. And then 1 more copper bead. Okay, so I'm going to take another copper bead. We're going to start peyote stitching it on. And you sometimes got to coax that first peyote stitch to get it to lay on there correctly. Going to pick up one of my green beads, do another peyote stitch, and we're going to keep peyote stitching on these green beads until we have 6 of them stitched on. And so I really want to just say that I appreciate you guys letting me know when these tutorials are not working out for you. It always helps me figure out where I need to do better. That's important for making tutorials because usually when you start out making tutorials, you're not going to do everything perfectly. And so I just appreciate the feedback, good and bad. Okay, so I've got 6 of these green beads peyote stitched on. And so the way this looks when we don't have our wire guard in the center, this is where it would have been if we were doing the white one. What we're just going to do is instead of skipping just one bead like we would with peyote stitch, we're going to skip 2 beads without adding a bead. Okay, so I'm coming out of this bead right here and skipping 2 beads, going into the next bead. We're not adding any beads, so that's why it's decreasing. Okay, and so when we pull it up together, nice and tight, we have these 2 beads that we skipped bunching up in a little herringbone pattern. And so after that decreasing stitch, we just go back to peyote stitch. Right, and so that continues our little line of peyote. All the way up to the end. And so I hope this was helpful in sort of explaining that decreasing stitch a little better. You know, it's not always easy to make these little tiny things on camera because you gotta hang on to it. Your thumbs are pretty big. It's sometimes hard to see what you're doing through a screen since the camera is right there where my face would normally be. So I hope this was helpful. If it was, let me know. If it wasn't, let me know. I definitely like knowing what you guys think and feel about these tutorials. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you later.